BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? This episode is coming out the day after Christmas, December 26th, so I hope everyone who celebrates Christmas had a good holiday, and I would also like to drop a couple of announcements and reminders. The first is that there is an ongoing series about the death of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996 here on this channel, and JonBenet, of course, was found dead after Christmas, but the time of the murder is still somewhat in question. However, a lot of people associate the death of JonBenet with Christmas time, and that is coming out on the weekends here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and it's specifically focusing on the book Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular. But I am already thinking about some of the ideas that have been expressed by other theorists involving the death of JonBenet Ramsey, so there might be some new episodes coming out on the channel in a different variation, if you will. But there is also the Wednesday show that I do, which is devoted to the Phantom Killer, and that's an unsolved serial killer mystery from 1946. It is also known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, and it is very similar to the Zodiac case. So I invite you to like and subscribe to this channel if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, if you're curious about unsolved mysteries. And there's always the Anything Goes Friday segment, where any subject is fair game. Anything under the sun or in the darkness, and I really try to blend in a lot of different topics. For example, recently I did an episode on the Sandy Hook shooting, and I don't talk about mass shooters too frequently, but I've also talked about a lot of serial killers. In serial killer cases where they've been solved, they've identified the perpetrator, but looking at more of the psychological aspects of this person and what drove them to kill, and how society chooses to address the subject. A lot of things going on here on Black Box Online Radio. But I would also like to talk to you guys about something from last week's episode. There was one comment that I had to delete immediately, and I don't often do that here on BBOR, but somebody had a big problem with an image that I used for the thumbnail of last week's Zodiac Killer News Report, and there was a photo of this man, and someone said, "What is wrong with you? This guy looks nothing like the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer didn't have a mustache. Eat a dick, dumbass." I deleted that instantly, and the reason why is because I absolutely did not say that this man was a Zodiac Killer suspect, and furthermore, that was discussed very frequently in the episode. His picture was used in the thumbnail simply because I was discussing the story. His name is Hugh Scruton. His name was Hugh Scruton, rather, and he was a victim, not a suspect, but a victim. He was a victim of the Unabomber, and again, 100% not a suspect in anything involving the Zodiac Killer mystery. Instead, I was talking about the way that the Unabomber chose to attack Hugh Scruton using a bomb versus some of the psychological patterns of the Zodiac Killer. And I was just like, if you're not even going to pay attention to the episode, if you're not even going to try and actually evaluate what I'm saying on its merits, and you're just going to just look at the thumbnail and then immediately start responding, then absolutely that type of stuff is just going to be taken down. And this whole thing about eat a dick dumbass, well, there are a few people who choose to act like this in the comment section. 99% of you guys are awesome. You are following along with the true crime cases. You give genuine input on the subjects. You're discussing things fairly and honestly, and I love that. I appreciate that. You guys are just amazing. But it's that nasty, ridiculous 1% that is acting like they're better than everyone else. People who say things like this commenter. But I heard something about that recently on another channel when someone was saying these people who use very insulting, profane, obscene language in the comment section and they start attacking either the presenter or other commenters, they think they're smart, they think they're funny, they think they're tough, but they're not. And absolutely everybody else is just looking at that person and saying, wow, what a loser. This person is just obnoxious. And I'm forced to agree. But enough about that, and I would just say there's a final concluding note that some people believe that the Zodiac Killer and the Unabomber were one and the same. I was discussing the book Exposed by Mark Hewitt. However, not everyone is in complete agreement with that. In fact, many people think that Ted Kaczynski is one of the weaker suspects in the Zodiac mystery. But to the people who do think that Kaczynski was the Zodiac, then the Unabomber victims are also Zodiac Killer victims, and that's why I was talking about the death of Hugh Scruton. But that's that I think doesn't serve too much of an explanation anymore. Onto some actual Zodiac Killer news. Thomas Henry Horn, the author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, has launched a website for not only the book, but I believe it's just a redirect to his mainframe, because I saw that he had posted a website URL for themythofthezodiackiller.com, but when I clicked on that, it redirected him to a website for Professor Thomas Henry Horn. He is the proponent of the Zodiac hoax theory, and more or less its originator, the idea that there was no Zodiac killer, and that there was somebody who wrote letters taking credit for murders that he didn't commit. And I've talked a lot about the Zodiac hoax theory in the past, so I wanted to focus in on a very specific issue, because he also re-released some videos that he had more or less recorded in the past, and he may have altered the images in some of them, but I was watching his video about the Zodiac Killer's Blue Rock Springs shooting, and there's a very specific point I would like to talk about. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. His first murder was the Lake Herman Road murders, which took place on December 20th of 1968. The second crime took place on July 4th of 1969 when the Zodiac Killer chose to attack Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau. That occurred sometime around midnight, like going into July 5th. I've estimated in the past that it occurred at 11:55 p.m. on July 4th, but there is a certain amount of guesswork involved on my part. Okay, so at 12:10 a.m., somebody calls this in saying that there are these two people that have been attacked, and there's this bloody scene where Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau had been shot in a car. Then the paramedics come, the ambulances. Darlene Ferrin is taken to a hospital, and at 12:38 a.m., she is pronounced dead. At 12:40 a.m., there is a phone call that took place, and I'm going to read to you the text of that phone call, which has been posted on ZodiacCiphers.com. I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. And perhaps I can do a better Zodiac voice. I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. something that sounds monotone yet mocking, and also a very odd goodbye at the end of the call, so said dispatcher Nancy Slover, who had received the call. Now, the first point that is mentioned in the Myth of the Zodiac Killer Blue Rock Springs video was that this is not from an audio file, this is not from an audio recording, it is not a direct transcription. This is what was done based on the recollection of someone's memory. And again, Nancy Slover was the dispatcher that spoke to the Zodiac Killer and actually heard someone who claimed to have taken credit for the murders, and that there were multiple texts that were examined about the exact wording of the call, and then Nancy Slover finalized her decision and said that this is the most accurate wording based upon her recollection. But I think that this is just one of the biggest, well, and most saddening aspects of the Zodiac case. The phone calls were not recorded, and they weren't supposed to have been recorded, but if we had those voice samples, I think that that would clear up a lot of things about certain suspects. And if there was some way, if like they just had some sort of videography of the Zodiac killer, then that would clear up other aspects about the case. Or if there were more living witnesses, that would clear up other aspects of the case. Like, for example, if either David Faraday or Betty Lou Jensen had survived the Lake Herman Road murders, and they would be like, oh yeah, the guy was huge. He was like 6 feet 9 inches tall and extremely broad-shouldered. Well, then we would know that he wasn't the 5'8" person who shot Mike Michaud and Darlene Ferrin. Maybe. I mean, unless you would be under the idea that they're getting shot at, so they have no idea what they're paying attention to. Okay, I mean, there's always going to be some type of interconnection about discussions on the internet, but I think that there is just so little evidence in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and to the credit of somebody like Thomas Henry Horn, he really points out that the Zodiac persona exists in the letters and in the phone calls and other pieces of writing, such as the car door at Lake Berryessa, as well as, of course, the Zodiac Killer's ciphers. But there's a second thing that I want to do with this particular piece of text, the phone call that is. In the Blue Rock Springs video that was shared on that Myth of the Zodiac Killer Blue Rock Springs episode, it says that the killer, I shouldn't have said that, it says the person who made the call wasn't sure whether or not he wanted to report a crime or report a murder. Is he just simply reporting the crime, or is he actually taking credit for the murder? Because it begins with, I want to report a double murder. It doesn't say, I killed 2 people. It starts by simply reporting the crime. I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. The killer starts out by simply announcing that a crime had taken place, and he concludes by saying that he killed 2 kids last year. He doesn't even actually say that he is the person who shot Darlene Ferret and Mike Michaud. I want to report a murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you'll find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. So, by using the word also, linguistically, I think that that is somewhat of a connection. But this is, again, coming from a video that is supporting the myth of the Zodiac Killer, the Zodiac hoax theory, and other people have addressed this point in the past. How on earth could somebody have connected the Lake Herman Road murders to the Blue Rock Springs shooting in 30 minutes? 12:10 is when the crime is reported, 12:40 a.m. is when the call takes place. That means in 30 minutes someone had to learn about the murder and then connect it to Lake Herman Road and conceive the Zodiac Killer plan. 30 minutes, a 30-minute time window, right? Wrong. No, absolutely not. And, I mean, I'm only talking as somebody who has read the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, as well as doing a previous book discussion on its first part, The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986, and following some of the videos like the Stones Unturned podcast and the videos from Evan from Texas. And in one variant of the hoax theory, it's not genuinely the letter writer who's taking credit for the crimes via the phone calls. Very clearly, Thomas Warren has stated in the past that these were pranksters or somebody who was not genuinely connected, especially after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, that this could have been a prank call where somebody heard this on a radio transmission that's going over where the police are talking. It's like police chatter, if you will. And then somebody just simply made a prank call, like, I want to report a double murder. Someone's talking in some weird voice. They were just trolling the police in a very sick, twisted, and demented way. And then that means that there is no 30-minute window. No, absolutely not. This person had weeks to compose the Zodiac killer persona, and now why would be a different question that I don't even want to get into right now. What I want to address is a certain linguistic challenge, because I'll tie this into the Zodiac killer's activities in the later part of 1969. Is this person actually taking credit for the murder or just simply reporting it? I want to report a murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. I have to turn to a longtime friend of the show named Rick Hansen, who was a regular listener back in 2020, and somebody brought up this exact issue, not with the Blue Rock Springs call, but with the Lake Berryessa call. And what Rick said was about their response about like overanalyzing the language, and he said nothing is inaccurate. And if we look at the text of the Blue Rock Springs call as well, I would say nothing is inaccurate. Nothing's wrong. Nothing is wrong with that sentence. I want to report a double murder. Well, this guy's not saying that he's only reporting the crimes. Is it possible to report a murder and also be the murderer? Yes. So therefore, I don't see anything that is completely significant of any fact or conclusion other than just that, just stating it as a fact. It's possible for someone to report a crime and also be the person who committed it. So I'm not saying anything about the hoax theory specifically, I just want that to be very clear. So I'm mostly open-minded to Zodiac killer theories that are expressed by people. However, with this specific issue, the person wasn't even sure if he wanted to report the crime or saying that he committed it or taking credit for the crime. I don't agree with that. I think everything is accurate. Now, the one that Rick Hansen was responding to was something about the call that came after the Zodiac killer's third crime, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, which happened just under 2 months later. Around 2 months later, it's July 4th of 1969 to September 27th of 1969. And this is the text of the Lake Berryessa call. Again, not recorded, a recreation. I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Carmen Ghia. I'm the one who did it. So, this is a little bit different. I mean, the term double murder is used. That's the first linguistic similarity that I know. And the reason why Rick Hansen responded to somebody was, they were saying that, do you think it's possible that Brian Hartnell, the victim at Lake Berryessa, was an active participant in the crime, and that it was all a setup to target Cecilia Shepard, and that Brian was meant to be a survivor? I don't entertain that. I don't think that that's true. And when I was listening to the Zodiac Speaking podcast, which is hosted by Mike Morford and Richard Grinnell, very clearly they stated that Brian Hartnell survived by a millimeter, and they're basing that on the testimony of a medical professional, like a millimeter deeper, and he would have been dealing with fatal injuries. I absolutely do not think that Brian Hartnell was an active participant, because, I mean, you don't have to get stabbed 6 times in the back to be an active participant in someone else's crime. I mean, things like that do happen, but in this specific instance, I do not think that Brian Hartnell had anything to do with the orchestration of Cecilia Shepard's murder. But what Rick was pointing out was, I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. Someone's using that as evidence that the person wasn't completely sure that both victims were going to die? No, because there's nothing inaccurate about that statement. It's the same card. It's the same response. That works for both of them. I want to report a murder, no a double murder. I mean, he's taking credit for a murder, or he's reporting a murder, and he could have also been the killer. He says, I'm the one who did it. He is taking credit for the murder, and actually, 2 people were died. I murdered 1 person. Well, actually, there was also a second person that I murdered. Nothing is inaccurate, and that is the view that I take on this particular subject. So the long and short of it is, I'm seeing a relatively consistent linguistic pattern that has been shared in the Zodiac Killer's phone calls. And it's hard to say pattern when you have only these 2 samples, but these 2 samples are very similar. Let's get the word pattern out of there. These 2 samples of text resemble each other. I want to report a double murder. The same language is used, and they're also giving locations: Columbus Parkway, north of Park headquarters. Here's a very odd one, though. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, and multiple people have addressed this. Brian Arnold and Cecilia Shepard were hundreds of meters away from the Carmen Ghia at the time. How did the Zodiac even know that that was Brian Hartnell's Carmen Ghia? And it ties into some things. Well, he must have been stalking them, or he must have been watching them for an extended period of time. I've also pointed out that maybe the guy just thought, well, it was the only car there. And here is some of the wild speculation that I get pulled into myself. Did the Zodiac Killer know Cecilia Shepard? None of this stuff about Brian Hartnell being an active participant and orchestrating the murder, no. Did the Zodiac Killer know Cecilia Shepard? Because in psychological profiling, if a victim is stabbed, there's a higher chance of familiarity being involved. And Cecilia Shepard was the only victim that was stabbed, female victim that was stabbed. Well, yes, she's the only murder victim who was stabbed in the 1968 to 69 crime spree. Not at Lake Herman Road, not at Blue Rock Springs, not at the Stein murder in Presidio Heights. The Zodiac Killer only killed by knife at Lake Berryessa on September 27th of 1969, and then the crime concluded on around 6:30 p.m., but Cecilia Shepard passed away 2 days later in the hospital. So, I mean, I put 2 and 2 together that way, but I've been wrong before, and I could easily be wrong again. Now, in the previous Zodiac Killer news reports, I had been discussing the book Exposed by Mark Hewitt, which is all about the Zodiac Unabomber connection, and I told you guys very clearly I was also very eager to read the book The Unabomber and the Zodiac by Douglas Evander Roswell, and this is one that begins with some challenge questions. I know that not everybody is interested in the Zodiac Unabomber connection. Some people just want to put that in the file cabinet and just close the door on it, and they want to be like, well, Ted Kaczynski looks nothing like the Zodiac composite sketch, therefore he can't be the Zodiac Killer. But Kaczynski is indeed a real suspect, and I have always said if somebody has written a book, or is doing a podcast, or has even written a series of articles, or maybe they just posted a lot on forums, I will talk about their material. Chapter 1 of the Unabomber and the Zodiac, Douglas Oswell poses some challenge questions to the reader, and I love challenge questions. And if you've made it this far into the episode and you have any questions that you're curious about involving true crime cases, the Zodiac Killer, the Phantom Killer, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, or any other mystery at all, no matter what it is, feel free to put them in the comment section down below. For things outside of the Zodiac world, perhaps they'll make their way onto an Anything Goes Friday segment, but I do confess the topic list is getting rather lengthy. However, the first question posed by Douglas Oswell is, what kind of criminal was the Zodiac? Now, the honest answer is this is an unsolved case, but based on the conventional narrative, the Zodiac appears to be some type of sexually motivated serial killer who did not have close physical intimacy with the victims. Another example of this is, of course, the Unabomber. That's what Douglas Oswald is going at, but also the son of Sam shooter David Berkowitz, if you entertain the conventional narrative that Berkowitz was the lone shooter. And that is that he was a person who got some type of sexual gratification from committing murders. He was a power-assertive killer, and he also was most likely a Machiavellian. And, I use the definition that I got from Dr. Todd Grande, talking about how somebody who thought that he was so smart, intelligent, or superior to the rest of humanity that he didn't have to follow the laws of society, but rather he could move around them based on his own liking. And I think that is the Zodiac to a T. The guy's committing murders and then making phone calls and writing letters, taking credit for the murders because he's hunting people for sport and he wants other people to know about it. That is just screaming of some person who thinks that he's superior to everybody else. Now the next question is, what led him to kill? A lot of people believe that the Zodiac killer was led to kill by some type of sexual inadequacy. There are people who flat out think that the Zodiac killer was an impotent man who just had no ability to generate any type of sexual relationships. But even more broadly, some people think that the Zodiac was just a sexual outcast. Not a social outcast, but a sexual outcast. He was somebody who just did not have successful relationships in a close and intimate way, and he developed a lot of rage and animosity toward both men and women. That's why the first 3 Zodiac crimes were committed against people in heterosexual situations. At Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and Lake Berryessa, there are men and women who are both either in cars or nearby cars. It's just 2 people. You could call them couples, but they're just 2 people in cars by themselves, and a man and a woman have been targeted. Then the Zodiac killer moves on to murder Paul Stein, a lone male, so it's very confusing, but is it possible that the Zodiac was simply murdering men because he wanted to get them out of the way so he had access to women? Or is this something different altogether, that just that's where people were, that's where people went to be alone for privacy, not even necessarily physical intimacy or anything sexual, but they just went to these locations because they wanted to be alone for a while. And in both the Zodiac killer case and the Phantom killer case, there's discussion on, well, these people might not even have been intimate or in any type of physical encounter. They may have just been having friendly conversations when they were interrupted by the killer. It's not like they were having sex in the backseat of the car and they got blindsided. In fact, at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, it's quite possible that both victims were in the front seat. Definitely at the Blue Rock Springs shooting, both victims are sitting in the front seat, and it doesn't appear that they are involved in any type of intimacy when they are approached by the Zodiac. So heterosexual animosity could lead this person to kill. Just being jealous or envious of people who are in social situations under the presumption that there is some type of sexual intimacy about to happen. And it's not like the Zodiac's walking up and asking them questions. Hey, what are you two doing tonight? Are you boyfriend and girlfriend? No. He was the type of person to shoot first and never ask any questions at all. But a lot of people also believe that there was some type of rejection from society involved with the Zodiac killer's choices to commit these crimes, because it's that proverb that I talk about over and over again. A child who is not loved by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Yes, that's exactly what I think the Zodiac killer is doing, because that is common behavior among serial killers. And in the previous episodes on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, I've talked very frequently about how there is some type of event in someone's life where somebody is extremely traumatized, and they're usually traumatized by someone very close to them, and this leads them to commit murder. And the first time I used this expression was when I was talking about the case of Daniel Marsh, someone who committed a double murder, and he told his best friend about it, who went on to report him. And the friend did the right thing in that particular situation. But one of the factors that created the the motivation to kill for Daniel Marsh was that his mother had a homosexual relationship with his kindergarten teacher. And I said, well, it's almost like a pillar of his childhood was shattered. Maybe two pillars of his childhood were shattered, the mother and the kindergarten teacher. And that's why I began using the term on this channel, shattering of the pillars of childhood. And most people experience something like that. Another example would be the serial killer Alan Legere from Canada, who was known as the Monster of the Miramichi, lost his brother as a teenager. His brother was the closest person to him, and his brother was hit by a truck and killed. And his mother said, that should have been you that got hit by the truck. Shattering of the pillars of childhood. Ted Bundy as well had learned a dark family secret that the person whom he thought of as his sister was actually his biological mother. And Paul Bernardo, the Scarborough rapist, also one half of the Ken and Barbie killers. The other half was Karla Homolka. Paul Bernardo learned just simply that he was adopted and his family had been lying to him. These types of actions are viewed as betrayals, and also they're viewed as the people who are meant to keep you safe are lying, deceiving, and mishandling someone's trust, abusing the situation, or even if it's just something as simple as you're adopted and we're not telling you, deception, sharing things that are untrue, and the whole concept of, well, someone has told a lie and now they're telling other lies to cover it up. It's a shattering of the pillars of childhood. So I definitely think that all of those actions would have been present in the Zodiac killer's life. Not any of those specific things, like I don't know if the Zodiac killer had a brother who got hit by a truck, but feeling some type of intense betrayal from someone very close to him. I think almost all serial killers experience that, except for the ones who are involved with extremely thug-life behavior, for lack of a better term, and I'll just leave it at that. Next question. How did the act of murder gratify his sensibilities? I think that the Zodiac was someone who did enjoy killing a lot, and some people think that the Zodiac committed the Blue Rock Springs shooting at 11:55 p.m. on July 4th of 1969, and it's not till 45 minutes after that there's the first phone call at 12:40 a.m. on July 5th. So, what on earth was the Zodiac doing during that time frame? And part of me thinks that maybe the Zodiac just drove to some secluded parking lot and he's just catching his breath and just going like, wow, like the adrenaline is surging and he has done something that is very, very dangerous and very, very illegal, but he's already committed the Lake Herman Road murders where he's done that once before. Now the deviant behavior needs to escalate. He needs to do something to fuel his own excitement. How did the act of murder gratify his sensibilities? He was fueling his own excitement with these crimes. These are thrill kills, killing for the thrill of it, and the way to constantly make it entertaining in a disgusting way is to do things that are more and more intense. To not get caught, but almost get caught. And I got that from an episode of Diagnosis Murder, the show with Dick Van Dyke that I watched growing up. A lot of people, even just like of all age groups I've talked to, they say they love Diagnosis Murder. They love Dick Van Dyke when he would play the crime-solving Dr. Mark Salone. And one guy in that was a thrill killer just on one episode, and someone saying, "Are you trying to get caught?" And he said, "No, I don't want to get caught. I want to almost get caught." Now, is the Zodiac some guy who's getting off on that? 110% yes. What's the evidence for that? Just what I stated. First, he commits a double murder. Then he commits it's a possible double murder, and he has to take credit for it via a phone call. Third, he has to go out in some type of wacky costume, carrying a knife and pre-cut lengths of rope and a marker to draw on the car door at Lake Berryessa, or write a message on it, rather. But let's just even look at the language. He has committed a crime. He's taken credit for it via a phone call. He's written a letter sharing details that only he and the police know, that was mailed around July 31st of 1969. The second letter mailed sometime around August 4th of 1969. The postmark date is unknown, to the best of my knowledge. And he's talking about details of the crimes, and then he goes out in this costume, and he has to make a phone call. Instead of writing a letter, he writes a message on the car door, just leaving these very direct pieces of evidence that he has killed these people. And it was Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com that talks about how there is this desire from the Zodiac to just show the entire world that he committed these murders, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and the Stein murder, that he is the one who did it. So with crimes such as the pre-Zodiac ones, like the Gaviota shooting, the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, or the Swindle murders, or perhaps the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, or the abduction of the disappearance of Donna Lass. We don't even know if Donna Lass was truly abducted. That these crimes do not have the same person just begging the world to say, hey, look, I did this. I'm the one who did it. And people have their reasons for thinking that, but I definitely do not believe 100% that the Zodiac ever murdered anyone outside of the Bay Area, or I don't believe that any of those pre-Zodiac crimes or post-Zodiac crimes were the same person, because the physical evidence just isn't there. And people can talk about this until the end of time, but I'll believe it once there is evidence. The Zodiac is someone who is very braggadocious, but I've also talked about 3 different voices in the Zodiac Killer's writing. One of them is what I call the braggadocio, and then there's also the sad man, who is just talking about how I get lonely, and I get so lonely that I'll do my thing, meaning that he is going to commit murder. He doesn't like to be ignored. He's just this sad, lonely person. And then the third one is just someone who acts like he was bored and has nothing else to do. Rather similar to the second. But at first the Zodiac's like, I like killing people because it's so much fun. He's just bragging to the world. He's like, oh yeah, but I'm also very lonely and I have nothing else to do with my time, so I'm writing these letters. So that's my answer as to how did the act of murder gratify his sensibilities. I will read one more thing here from Douglas Oswell's book. Modern criminology divides multiple murderers into 2 broad categories: serial killers, so named because they commit a series of killings, and are defined as individuals who murder at least 3 different people or on 3 occasions with a cooling off period in between each crime. Mass murderers are defined as those who kill 4 or more people in one location in one incident. And I just wanted to share that there. The first page of Douglas Oswell's book, The Unabomber and the Zodiac, but I definitely appreciate the challenge questions that he asked to the reader. And I would like to talk now about the story of John Leonard, and that is a true crime case from 1970 that has recently been connected somewhat to the Zodiac killer. And some people believe that John Leonard, a man who was murdered in Pennsylvania, may have indeed been a Zodiac killer victim, Monroe County, Pennsylvania, to be precise. I didn't want to read off the first person's name, but this is one commenter whom I can address, and this comment comes to us from The Vault, who says, I emailed various law enforcement agencies and the media regarding John Leonard, and not once did I say that he was only a proposed Zodiac killer victim because his killer resembled the composite sketch. Mostly it was about the button letter. I have been more concerned with getting theories to the police and media rather than the online Zodiac community. It doesn't look like you did much research on existing theories regarding John Leonard, or just was not looking in the right place. Now, this is talking about how there have been new documents that have been released to the public, and there was a 900-page case file that was released, and John Leonard's own daughters are going through it, trying to solve his murder mystery. There is a composite sketch in that looks rather similar to some aspects of the Zodiac killer. It appears that it's a guy wearing dark-rimmed glasses, and I said that the only reason why people are trying to make a Zodiac killer connection to John Leonard is because the killer was wearing dark-rimmed glasses. I stand by that mostly, but it wasn't The Vault. There was another commenter who said that there are a few reasons why people think John Leonard was a Zodiac killer victim. The first is he was murdered very close to a place named Paradise Valley, And the Zodiac stated multiple times that he has just this affinity or fascination or connection to the word paradise. He says that when he dies, he will be reborn in paradise, and those whom he has killed will be his slaves. On the Halloween card, which was mailed in 1970 as well, shortly after the murder of John Leonard, it's about 5 weeks, maybe 5 or 6 weeks after the murder of John Leonard, which took place in September of 1970, on October 27th of 1970, the Zodiac mails the Halloween card that has the interlocking words, Slaves in Paradise, and the Zodiac would also talk about Slaves in Paradise in the 1969 340 cipher. So, this seems like someone who is really talking about creating the myth or the mythos that he wants to murder people, and he will die, he'll be reborn in paradise, and those whom he has killed will be his slaves, and that John Leonard was targeted in Paradise Valley, part of Monroe County, Pennsylvania, or very close to Paradise Valley, because the Zodiac is trying to secretly commit these crimes. There was also someone who left something in the comment section saying that Zodiac killer Lawrence Kane was a master of ceremonies at an event very nearby in Pennsylvania. I think they said he was in Pittsburgh. I was trying to find that exact comment and I couldn't track it down. But I looked for that online, that Lawrence Kane was definitively placed in Pennsylvania in 1970, in September of 1970 nonetheless. I couldn't find a corroborating source, but I don't doubt that guy got it from somewhere. If anybody else finds that before I do, before the next Zodiac Killer news report, please share in the comments section down below. I'm still very skeptical about any connection involving the death of John Leonard, and I'm going to address the elephant in the room. You're going to have to do a lot more than just say that you found the word paradise written somewhere near somebody's murder site and say that that's a Zodiac Killer connection. I mean, to the credit of somebody like Steve Odell, he talks about the 1967 murder of Lucilla Lalu in the Philippines, who was found about 500 meters from a street named Zodiac, and then the Zodiac emerges in 1968. Even I would say that that's a stronger connection than just saying Paradise Valley. I mean, did the Zodiac ever talk about Paradise Valley? No, he was talking about a metaphysical realm in the afterlife. So I'm just really not impressed by that type of thinking, but I will give credit to the Vault. I will agree with the Vault. It is true that I didn't do an enormous amount of research on the murder of John Leonard. I've read off several articles about him. Okay, not several. I read off perhaps 2.5 articles about John Leonard here on this show, and some other points. John Leonard was a taxi driver, and he was killed by somebody for almost no reason in a motiveless crime, and the person who resembles the Zodiac Killer's description. But I also should point out something to you guys. I didn't just make that up, that people are trying to connect the murder of John Leonard to the Zodiac Killer because the killer resembled the composite sketch. Multiple people wrote into the comments section saying that they just wanted to know, hey, what do you think about this new composite sketch that has been released? And they thought it resembled the Zodiac Killer. It wasn't only on my channel. I went back to a place where I knew I would find it, and it was on Tom Voigt's channel. There was a user named Marley Kai 2000 who said, hey, just a question, in your opinion, do you think John Leonard could be another possible Zodiac Killer victim since he was a taxi driver and the suspect looks similar to the Paul Stein sketch? I mean, that's just an example of someone else on a different channel asking the exact same question. I didn't make that up. I mean, people were asking about that on the internet, and it was the first thing that caught the attention of people who are following these mysteries. But no matter what, rest in peace to John Leonard, and he didn't deserve to be murdered that way, and there's something very admirable about his own daughters trying to solve his murder 50 years later. And because we just passed the Christmas holiday, I would like to talk about something that I had wanted to read for a while, and that was the book A Fantasia for Two Lutes by Douglas Oswell, and I've kind of overloaded myself with reading, and I'm trying to get through some Zodiac material that I will talk to you about in the distant, distant future, as well as, of course, some other true crime things. I told you I'm doing the book discussion on JonBenet Ramsey, Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular. I'm also going through The Phantom Killer by James Presley, and even just trying to sneak in a little bit of fiction. And one example of that was A Fantasia for Two Lutes by Douglas Oswell. I don't know about you guys, but I read nonfiction so much more easily than I do fiction. However, A Fantasia for Two Lutes tells the story of a very mysterious guy named Aaron Westwood, and he is a grave digger. And as I was reading it, I just kept getting the feeling that this is a story from like the 1600s or something, but it's not. It's set in more contemporary times, and there's a very early line in the book where it says that someone's using a cell phone, and if I hadn't been paying close attention, I would have thought that it was a very old-fashioned story, and I think that is purely intentional, and one of the characters is even named Miss Honeybutter, and it's almost just trying to create some type of whimsical alternate reality. And if you're curious at all, I invite you to check out A Fantasia for Two Lutes by Douglas Oswell, and as well as his other book, The Unabomber and the Zodiac, and his full pen name is Douglas Evander Oswell. And I look forward to reading more of the Unabomber and the Zodiac, because one of the real reasons to do that was to try and find out what are the similarities and differences between Douglas Oswell's The Unabomber and the Zodiac and Mark Hewitt's Exposed for the month of December 2022. If you go to those Zodiac Killer News Reports, I did numerous discussions on Exposed by Mark Hewitt, talking all about the Zodiac Unabomber connection. And I invite you to listen, as well as like and subscribe. And of course, there is always BuyMeACoffee.com. And anybody who makes a donation or contribution using BuyMeACoffee.com will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. And that's what I would like to do right now, because it's not only BuyMeACoffee.com, there's also the super thanks here on YouTube that you can use. And the first one comes to us from Batman66, who says Merry Christmas, and he also gives us a big thumbs up. Thank you so much, Batman66. And we have one from Swedish Chef 1977, who says, Thank you, Ned, for your continued great work with BBOR, and I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. Hey, Swedish Chef, you are definitely high in my book for that. And the next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, who says, For your level-headed approach to the Zodiac case. And all of these were super thanks that were done here on YouTube. Super thanks as well as BuyMeACoffee.com. And hey, you guys in the audience, you are all amazing. Like I said, 99% of people who follow this show are very respectful to the victims. And I think that that is so important. And anybody who chooses to be disrespectful or obscene or profane or leaving those nasty messages, you've seen them around. You know who they are. Forget them. We don't need them. And that will be all for me now. So anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.